Okay, hi everyone, it's Ben from Lateral here, and today I'm just going to give you a little bit of a track breakdown of our latest release on YANA Music called Every Night. So we'll just get straight into that, and let me give you a quick blast of it so you know what you're listening to later on. Here we go. Okay, there we go. That's the track. So very quickly, this track came about during lockdown. So the other member of Lateral, Patrick or Paddy, he was in London and I was up here in the Midlands, and he kept chucking ideas over. And one of them really caught my ear. It was basically the bass melody, and it was in the form of a pluck. So he sent me the MIDI for the pluck, and I literally dropped it like a couple of octaves and turned it into a bass. And straight away we were like, yeah, that's something we can definitely work with. And then he found this the vocal sample on Splice, I think, and that just kind of finished it off. And after that, we knew we had a track that we could get done pretty quick. It did come together really, really quickly, like a month or something, which is super fast for us. Usually when we produce, we start with melodies and then we find sounds to fill them in. So I know a lot of producers might start with sound design. We start with a bit of a jaunty tune and then find instruments to fill them in, and then go back and then we make drums for it and form it that way. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way. It's all good, and this is how we did this track. This is how we do most of our tracks. It's always melody first. So anyway, let's get into it a little bit, and I think we're going to start with the bass. Okay, let's go. Okay, so let's have a little look at the bass then. So this is the MIDI, the pattern for it, the melody. You can see it's in F. Of course, it's a dance floor track. Why wouldn't it be? We're not going to mess with that. You can sort of tell that it started out life as a plucky sort of sound because it jumps around all over the place. There's quite a lot of notes in this for a bass pattern, really. So we had a couple of problems with that, which I'll explain in a minute how we got around it. The actual patch itself is two oscillators, both saw waves, or both former saw waves. They've both been adapted a little bit to make them look more like ski lifts or something now, or ski jumps or whatever. The fundamental's been taken out, and there's some harmonics been removed from the low mids there. Both X saw waves. Oscillator A is detuned by 1, the random is set to 0, and there's only one voice. And the reason for that is, I mentioned earlier on that we're having some problems getting consistency from such a varied bass pattern. Now typically in drum and bass what happens is most bass patches start with a load of different voices or oscillators, and they're all detuned from each other, so you get that classic re-spaced sound, that sort of nasty, gritty, phasey sort of sound. With this having so many different notes, every time the note was triggered, you got quite a wildly different sound, and we didn't like that at all, because it's really important to have your low end to be consistent, and that's how it translates on a big system, especially for dance floor. You really want that low end to be solid all the way through, so you want the notes to trigger from the same point at each time, and not be sort of offset from each other, because then you get like sort of phasey, wobbly sort of sounds, and some notes can sound louder than others and have more impact at the bottom than others. Very bad for this kind of thing. So we use a single voice, and then we thought, okay, we're gonna have to use that and make that sort of sound gritty and nasty and raspy without actually having to do any detuning or anything like that. So it's not really a classic respace, but it does sound a little bit like it, although it's more of an acidy sort of bass sound. It's the effects that do that essentially. So without any of the effects on, it sounds like this. It's kind of nothingy. The first thing is distortion, drive 100%, mix 100%, tube distortion, like this. Sounds a bit better. The famous Serum Multiband Compressor, which goes on a lot of stuff. It sounds to me a little bit like OTT, or OTT sounds like this, whichever came first, but this is the sound. There's that raspiness for the top end that we like. There's EQ on there being controlled by an LFO. You can literally just see what's happening. I'll just play it to you. Like that. There is a filter on with a 50% mix, so it's not the full mix. It's just a little sort of texture in there, a little bit more flavour to the patch itself. You can't really tell a lot with it on or off, and on. It's just a little bit more movement within the patch itself. The main movement is being triggered from these two LFOs here. So every time a note is triggered, LFO 1 is working like this. You can see it. But the real sort of flavour is coming from LFO 2. So if I bypass LFO 2 and just leave LFO 1 on there, it sounds like this. Which sounds alright, but really we wanted a bit more movement in there over a longer period of time. So LFO2 is controlling the band 24 filter, but only by a tiny little amount. It's set to 2 bars, and these little curves have been drawn in manually to put certain embellishments on certain notes at certain times. So you take that off. In fact, let's play it again with just LFO1 on, like this. LFO2 and off. So it just gives a bit more movement to it. It's only a tiny little notch, as you can see, but that's all you need for this. It's a bandpass filter. There's a lot of resonance, and suddenly that turns into that sort of like wah wah sort of acidy bass sort of vibe, which is what we wanted. Post-processing is not much, to be fair. There's a FabFilter Saturn, just doing various bits and bobs to different bands. A couple of EQs, a lot of the low mids taken out there. This is one area of a track, like a dance floor track, you can afford to remove a little bit of these low mids. It doesn't change the sound a lot, but you find that if you overrepresented the frequencies around this area, the track kind of sounds a bit tiring, a bit boxy, or a bit boomy. You take these out a little bit very carefully, and suddenly the track can breathe and it comes to life a little bit, and it's what we find anyway. Obviously too much and your track will start to sound really thin, so be a bit careful with that. Mid-side EQ, boosting the sides at the top, cutting the sides below 300 Hertz, try and monoize the bottom bit there, and then the soft clipper, G-clip, just slightly cutting off those loud peaks there, and that is the bass basically. There's a lot of movement over 16 bars of this. You can sort of tell here. I'll just show you the automation. So if you look at from here, say, and that's really just automating loads of parameters, the filter mix, the highs, the lows. Towards the end of each phrase, the lows get slowly sort of taken out over a few bars, and that means that when the lows come back in for the next section, it has more impact. There's reverb washing out the bass there right up to the end of the phrase, and then that drops back to hardly anything again. You wash it out to bring it back in with more impact every time. The filter cutoff is constantly moving on this track. You can sort of see it here. It never stays still for long, and that's because we wanted to keep things interesting. In the intro, the build up to the drop, same things going on. These are chord sort of notes that are happening. We like our intros as a general rule to be more sort of chordally based. They're a bit more emotional, is that the word? Before we start hammering the riffs at the drop. So you can tell here it's a bit more expressive maybe. Bass is getting washed out, lows are being taken out, and then it comes like that, and you're back on the riffs. Sub bass is really, I think, going to be super sort of easy after that. Same notes. It's a sine wave that's actually been adapted to look more like a triangle wave because we've added harmonics in. You want to make sure that there's enough harmonics above the sub and at the low end of the bass in a dance floor track, or any track really. If you have a clean sine wave, you've got to have something doing the octave above the sub to carry it. But we like a real consistent sort of sound around there between the kick and the snare, so we've drawn the harmonics in by hand to actually be part of the sub bass. This one voice, the random set to 0, it triggers from the same point every single time, and again that's that consistency thing with the phasing and all that. So the sub by itself sounds like this. You get the idea. For a sub bass patch it does jump around a lot, but then the main bass does, and you can't really separate the two if you want them to sound like one part, a bass basically. Here they are together. In the analyzer, looks like this. That's the bass. And that's just the sub. You see the little harmonics there. And that's really it. That's the sub and that's the bass. Okay, so let's now take a look at the drums. Okay, so let's take a look at the drums. So what have we got? Let's just play the drum bus by itself. Yeah, sounds like that. Okay, so first things first, we've got the kick here. It's a pretty standard drum and bass dance floor kick. Yeah, I think this kick itself was actually off another track we made called Do It, which was also released on YANA earlier in the year. That itself was made in kick 2, I believe, and it was pitched to the note of F, the fundamentals on F, and that's it. Just keep things in key, and probably layered with another couple of kicks. Being very careful to keep the fundamental nice and clean as a sine wave. As you can see here, that's basically still a sine wave, so that's about as clean as you can get. Nothing's going to interfere with that. There's no phasing issues from layering it with too many samples, and that'll just cut right through and provide the most power in the mix. There's a nice strong transient to the kick there. It's quite a chunky transient, to be fair, and it's about the right length for a good solid dance floor kick. So it's somewhere between a 16th and an 1/8 of a bar. Yeah, okay. The snare sounds like this on its own. This is the finished snare that we've come up with, and what we'll do now, I'm going to go over to the other project in which we actually made the snare and break that down for you a little bit closer. Okay, see you in the other project. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a listen to the snare then, and get a little bit deeper with it. We've got the snare here. This is just the snare by itself, okay? This is not the clap or the tail or anything like that. This is just a dry snare, and this is what it sounds like. Okay, so it's quite a chunky snare. It's a little bit harsh sounding even, but for whatever reason we decided that's what the track needed to cut through probably the bass sound, which is quite full. So this is the snare we developed for it. The snare itself, you can break it down like this. There's a transient layer, which is just straight up metric tutorial 101. That's just a sine wave with a massive pitch envelope on it, and there's a little bit of white noise to fill out the top. Together, yeah, sounds like nothing. The body of the snare, the fundamental, is again sine wave, pitch envelope, and that is landing at G sharp. So just a little tiny bit over 200 hertz for your classic snare thud. It sounds more like a pulse than a knock of a snare, to be fair. So the sample's obviously a little bit longer than normal. We decided to keep it, put them together, the transient and the snare, fundamental. Yep, sounds shocking. But then we start stacking up little bits and bobs on top. So the first thing we've got here is that's just a snare sample with a lot of whip to it, a bit of a crack on it with all the lows taken out, so nothing is interfering with that fundamental, like nothing at all. That's coming through completely clean, trying to keep that as much of a sine wave as we can without layering it and distorting it. Then we've got another sample, bit more of a sort of rattly acoustic vibe with that. Same deal, all the lows taken out. We're just leaving the tops in there. And then we've got finally an acoustic snare, which is actually an amen snare. We've probably just pitched it a little bit. There's probably a bit of EQ. Bottom's taken off, the top's been taken off. And that's just to give it a little bit of tone, a little bit of something more different to separate from a purely synthesized kind of snare. It's a very quiet layer, to be fair. You might not be able to really hear it, to be honest, on its own. Altogether, sounds like this. That is a snare. It goes into a snare group, has a bit of saturation applied to it, soft tube. You don't want to overdo the saturation on anything that requires a transient saturation. Some of them tend to just kill transients outright, so you have to be a little bit careful of how much you apply. We've got some EQ, little boosts and various things, little notches. We've got LFO tool, which is it sounds like it's doing absolutely nothing, and it could well be, to be fair, but I think it's just dipping the tail a little bit of the snare, so it's keeping the transients at full volume, and it's just dipping the sample every time it's triggered. This helps a lot. This is a soft clipper. It's called G-Clip. It's a free VST, and we like it because it's quite visual, so you can see what's going on. So with this, instead of limiting, which we generally prefer soft clipping for some reason, this is the snare with it on. Turn it off, it loses a little bit of presence, and you can actually see, if you look at the waveform without the soft clipper on, the sample itself looks a little bit sort of wishy-washy. There's a massive sort of transient spike, and it dips and everything, and then comes back. With the clipper on, we've boosted it and we've pulled back the soft clipper to make it consistent, and it looks like this. There we go. So off, on, and you can hear that and you can feel it as well just by listening to the sample. So we don't really like to compress it. We don't really like to over limit it or anything, but we do like to get a consistent waveform for our samples. So if you look at that, it's basically a big wedge of snare. So when we drop it into the mix later on, we know that's going to be possibly the loudest part of the track, and that won't change because everything else will be sidechain, and we can really use that to control the rest of the mix from that and the kick itself. So yeah, we like nice consistent flat waveforms as much as possible without sort of killing the tone of them, and then they're easier to work with later on in the mix. Okay, and that is the snare. Last thing we do is burn the snare as a single sample, and we'll just go through it and we'll do little tiny cuts and volume edits like we've just done here. If you can see that, we've just knocked that bit down by almost a decibel, just to make sure that nothing's sticking up sort of higher than the transient. We like, sort of, like I said before, consistent looking snares, so we just manually go and do little volume automations on it, rather than sticking another limiter on or anything like that. You can't really tell, to be fair, what we've done there. It's a very small thing. It's probably just a little bit of OCD more than anything. So okay, that's the snare on its own. Back into the other project now, and we'll look at how we lay that with claps and tails. Okay, so back into the other project now. That was the snare by itself. The snare is then layered into the project with this sound, aka a clap sound. Really short little clicky thing, peaks around 1.5 kilohertz, which is about right for a clap. And then we've got a tail on the snare, which is just white noise, which is distorted a few times. Probably EQ'd a little bit as well. Yeah, LFO tool just keeps the start of the sample out. Obviously we decided later on to back it off a little bit at the start, so LFO tool does that for us. Loads are taken out, and that just gives it a little bit more of like a space with the tail. And then we've got a clap tail, so another tail, but this one is sounds like the clap basically, which would have been a different clap sample with reverb, and then we've took the transient, in fact a lot of it out, to be fair. We've probably scooped out, using volume automation, everything from the first bit of the snare, so it doesn't interfere at all. They don't overlap hardly whatsoever. So yeah, it's just that whoosh sort of whoosh room sort of sound. So add those elements back in on top of the snare. And now you've got your thrashy dance floor drum and bass snare. So again, that's the snare by itself. Nice and dry. Other elements, and suddenly it sort of comes to life a little bit. Play it with the kick. Starting to sound like a dance floor track now. Okay, so then we've got a hi-hat. This hi-hat, it just goes on the 1 and the 3. What we find for dance floor tracks, you've really got to emphasize the 1, 2, 3, 4 of the beat. It's as simple as that. That's where you nod to. It's really, you've got to be punching the air at those points, 1, 2, 3, 4. Otherwise, it's just not going to have that drive. So this hi-hat just appears in the 1 and the 3. The first hi-hat, we've taken off the transient. We've just knocked it back a little bit because the kick's already doing that, as you can see there. So we play the hi-hat with the kick and snare. And there you go. There's some more hi-hats here. Again, these are doing 8ths, and the snare 1 has been taken out. But the emphasis again is on the 1 and the 3. You can literally see on the waveform 1 and 3 is bigger, and the ones in between are a little bit smaller, just to keep it flowing. But you play it by itself. Transients removed from the kick again, and you put it all together with the rest of it. There we go. That's really starting to move along now. Again, we always find that when you're producing drums, it gets really easy to sort of get over technical with them, and suddenly you've just killed the vibe. So as a general rule, if you're not nodding along to your own drums as you're making them or as you're listening to them back, if your head's not bobbing back and forth, then you've lost something somewhere, because presumably that just means that you want to dance to your own drums, which can only be a good thing. So keep just checking that you're not going too hard in for the technical stuff and you're losing the actual roll and the groove of the drums, which is most important. So anyway, we've got some 909 rides here. Just doing 4ths, a little bit of sheen on top. You can hear that we've backed off the snare transient quite a lot, so again, nothing's conflicting with the snare. We've got a little break here, and that's where you start to see a little bit of the skip, the syncopation come in with the track. Then we've got, I think, what is this, the top loop. Yes, basically a cymbal loop, a cymbal wash, and that's also got a little bit of skip in it as well. So that's obviously a break that we've found, probably from Splice or something like that. And it's just filling out the tops a little bit and giving it a bit more groove. This is the Tambourine from the Think Break. The Think Break has 5 different breaks in it, and you probably know them all, but there's the very last one, I think, is just the Tambourine going by itself, so we use that quite a lot. It's a lovely sort of little element to bring into your track to fill out the tops. Adds a little bit of a sparkle there as well, and a little bit of pace as well, because it's going quite fast. We've done a bit of a notch there, obviously something a bit spiky up there we didn't really want. again, you got no kick and you got no snare in there, so they're taken out. Leave them clean, and then right at the end, some sort of jazzy cymbals that we liked, which had a nice, I think we just include these because they sounded nice really, and there's a little bit of skip in there as well. So again, we'll put it all together, and there we go. That's the drum beat. Now this drum beat's got quite a lot of swing in it, and that's because the bass part, with the way that is, the notes and the way it's used, required it. Sometimes you can have it a bit more sort of straight, sort of like a rocky sort of sound, like a lot of dancehall producers really get that big rock sound going quite well. This track didn't really need it. This track needed something a little bit different, so it's a little bit swingier than normal. The drum bus has a little bit of saturation on it. Again, not too much, because I said before, you'll kill transients. This is the Fresh Air plugin, which we really like. We just found out about this. We use it on pretty much all the drum buses now. So there's two controls, mid-air, high air. They just basically fill out your top end. I think there's a bit of saturation and a bit of EQ going on with this plugin. Not entirely sure, but you just boost these two controls here, and it really kind of washes out or smudges the top end into like a wall of noise kind of thing, but use it sparingly. You can see we've used 2% and 1% on this anymore, and it gets a little bit harsh to the ear. We've got some EQ, and actually we haven't got any EQ because this has just been taken off, so that's doing nothing. Let's get rid of that. And then we've got G-clip, the soft clipper again. When you play it, you can see what's going on. Really, that's very straightforward, just taking the peaks off there. Okay, just controlling it basically. There's a couple of incidental things. There's a sort of a big like clappy sound here called Big Clap, obviously. You can hear the sidechain on that. Again, everything we do, every single element in this track is sidechained briefly to the kick and the snare. So when the transients for the kick and the snare hit, nothing else is happening. That's all you're going to hear. That allows you to maximize your volume and push the levels a little bit higher, because nothing's conflicting with that. We've got a little bit of percussion, very straightforward, and that's actually about it for the drums. There's a sort of kick roll kind of thing going on with the drops, and again during the track, it sounds like this. Sound kind of awful by themselves, but in the build up they work quite well. So yeah, there's a little bit of automation here. The lows are being taken out of the kick roll. The closer you get to the drop, you don't want too much low end energy right before the drop, because it will just take away from the impact, and the highs are coming in slowly. That's about it. The snare's got a little bit of a pitch thing going on it, and that will be the actual snare, I think, from the track itself, or is it a special one? No, it's just the snare that we use in the track, cut up into a snare roll, and that's it. They are the drums. Okay, let's have a look at what else we've got. All right, vocals then. This should be pretty short and sweet. These are the vocals. Yeah, I don't want to overplay those because they can get a little bit much after a while. She's basically saying the same thing over and over again. Don't want it to get too tiring. Yeah, they're just vocals from Splice. Patrick found them as part of the original demo that he sent and sort of pinged them over to me. And all I did really was stick Ozone on there, maximizer, just make them a little bit bigger, a bit more consistent. There's a delay going on. Cubase's built-in delay, bit of EQ, take the bottoms off, little dip, little boost, and then take the tops off. Valhalla, so go-to reverb, Valhalla Vintage, You can hear that on there, and that's really it. There's Cubase's built-in pitch correcting thing there, which comes in a couple of times. Just around here, you can sort of see. Every day. Just to make it a bit more interesting towards the end there. We chopped it up quite a bit. Some little delays just done manually here. Just little embellishments like that. We've got lots of little loops going on throughout the whole of the track. They sort of come and go like this. Then the night. And you can hear that the little loop there is getting pitched up slowly, and the reverb's opening out to sort of give it that washout sound to increase the impact of everything else at the drop. So that's just literally a loop of like 1 or 2 words here and there. There's a vocal octave going on here. A couple of points in the track. It's the main vocal. It's just been pitched down by 12, and it sounds like this. Sounds pretty horrible by itself, but it works just as a bit of just to thicken it up, the main vocal, while the beat is on like this. Yeah, don't listen to it too close because it does sound a bit weird, but it works in the context of everything else. Right, here's the original pluck that the track started out life as. So this is when the first sort of demo came across on WhatsApp all those months ago. This was the lead for the track, basically. And that had like a solid bass notes underneath it, doing those chords that the bass was doing in the build-up. Before I lowered these notes basically by a couple of octaves and turned it into a bass part, like I said earlier. But we kept the plucks in because they're a nice little texture for the track generally. So it's just a saw wave. This is detuned voices. LFO. It's just a really basic pluck sort of sound. The compressor, a bit of EQ. That's it. A lot of reverb on. Well, there's actually delay. I think there's another group here somewhere. Yeah. Bit of reverb for it, which is automated in and out. Bit more EQ. Yeah, bit of EQ. Dip the mids, whatever. Real basic sort of sound. But it sounds kind of good when it comes in. As an example, you can sort of hear it there. I'll put the beat on as well so you can get an idea about that. Just bringing little elements in and out, really. Just to change the vibe up a little bit from that bass. The bass is sort of super raspy and gritty, so this is just a nice little smooth sort of top to have on it. Yeah, that's the plucks. They're in the intro, doing the main track. The work is like a little sort of turnaround now and again, like this. Again with the beat on, just gives it a bit of a nice turnaround for the track. Yeah, nice little vibe there. Elsewhere we've got you just probably heard little bits of percussion now and again. Just intro stuff, and we also use it in the beat as well because it's just a nice sort of atmospheric sound. We've got an arpeggiated synth doing this, which is really basic. Sidechain is a bit mad on that one. You can really hear where it's coming in. There's another arpeggiated synth underneath it. Just sound like a couple of square waves, really. And they go throughout most of the track apart from the very first drop, just like background sort of movement. What we got intro wise, a lot of pads. We do like a few pads, and Patrick, aka Pad, sent the pads over when we were constructing the track. Again, he found these and then just WhatsApped them to me. It's the first one. It's like a choir sample almost. Yeah, just a choir sort of sample, solid note. Another pad here. That's pretty nice, like an organ sort of sound. He's very good at this sort of thing. Finding these little textures. Got another pad here. LFO tool is doing the movement on that. If we turn it off. Okay, so yeah, if you leave it off, it's just an atmospheric pad. Bring it on. A little bit more movement in the intro, a little bit of rhythm there. It's chord hits. Oh, these are nice. Yeah, I remember liking these when Paddy sent them over. It's not a very chordy sort of song, but these chord hits work really well. I think we've got like an intro bass somewhere, and I think these work with it. And then like an eighth bass, like a sort of classic chugga chugga eighth bass working at the same time, together like this. Yeah, we like that. Sounds a bit synth wavy. So there's intro elements, intro hi-hats. Hear the riff starting to want to come in there, a little bit of tension. Yeah, that's basically the intro stuff. Any more pads? A little bit of guitar actually here. I think Patrick actually played this. He might have even played it into his phone and sent it, and we processed it. Yeah, I've got a feeling he actually played that himself and then sent it over, just these notes. Sounds a bit out of tune, doesn't it, that does? But yeah, it seems to work. I think he played it himself, or it's a splice sample. Either way, that's what it is. Atmospheric hit. What is that? Oh yeah, that's a nice little turnaround. Pitched it down 12, pitched it up 12. That works really well in the context of all the intro stuff. So I'll just play this together for you. Reverse vocal. So yeah, like what I said earlier on about intros being nice and melodic and having lots of atmosphere and depth and notes and stuff. What's this thing doing here? And then when you get to the drop of the track, we tend to just find a solid riff and just hammer it, you know, and then the breakdown comes along and you can go back to the emotional stuff, the chords and whatnot, and that gives you a nice rounded track. You can even hear that in any part of the track. Don't know what that is. Yeah, it's just a little tiny sound. That actually happens just before the drop. So we've got rises on the drop. We've got this riser which we use in every single track we've ever done. Sounds a little bit sort of thin by itself. Stack them up a little bit. Yeah, builds a little bit of tension. And you've got the white noise down sweeps. Massive side chain on that, as you can tell. To keep those dominating sounds away from the kick and snare at all costs. Down sweep 2, what is that? Yeah, so just in the track itself, at different points, we just like to bring in loads of different sort of samples, lots of sweeps and that kind of thing, because though you can't really hear them actually in the track, you feel them, you feel yourself being taken down or lifted up before little mini drops and different sections and stuff. So it keeps things moving, even though you can't really hear it, you definitely feel it. And I think, do you know what? I think that is about it for this breakdown. That's basically all the elements. We've got here a couple of kick booms. Yeah, it's got splice stuff basically. Sub boom. Boom. Yeah, that's about it really. And yeah, that's the track. Okay, So nothing left to do really now, apart from to say we hope that you found this useful in some way. Hope you got something out of it. Hope it wasn't too boring. If you do like it, give us a shout, and we're quite happy to do another one for a different track of ours. Yeah, it's when we were coming up, like first doing our very first tracks, we used to eat up these tutorials like nobody's business. Used to watch them 10 times and try and pick up tips. So hopefully maybe we could have passed something on here. Let us know what you think, and yeah, we're quite happy to do some more if you got anything out of it. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Take it easy. I'll see you later. Goodbye.